So the story begins with a young man. Not an Irishman, a Britishman. His name was Patricius before it was Patrick. And he lived on the western shore of England, which in those days was not England or Britain, but was part of the proper Roman Empire. He lived literally on the edge of the world. The Irish have a word or a phrase they used to describe the way they were in those days. They say, we were beyond the beyonds. The Romans stopped when they got to Britain. They built a great wall to keep the Scots in their place, and they had no interest whatsoever in going across the Irish Sea to find what was there. They had enough to deal with. They had France, they had Germany, they had Palestine, they had bits of India, they had North Africa, they had Italy. Let the Irish sit in the darkness, they thought. Let's hold on to what we have. That's where Patricius grew up. And as a young man, he was snatched from that Roman world by Irish pirates. The story says they came across the sea in those days, and they would raid the west coast, where the county Kerry is now. And they would take the young, but not too young, because you can push a young person around and then you can still get a day's work out of them. Think about that for a minute. To be not just taken from your home, but to be taken from the world. It's like being abducted by aliens. All the things that you grow up expecting to be there, all the things that you are told are durable and permanent, they are gone in the flash of an eye. And that is how Patricius began his life. He was sold to a petty chieftain, and he was sent out to do the most menial work they had in those days, which was to wash the sheep up in Black Armagh on the sides of a mountain today that's called Sliamish. He spent his days, and he spent them in the same way that we hear the psalmist speak about his days. If the Lord had not been with me, I would have been swept away. Patrick says in his confessions, in those days I did nothing but pray. There was no one to talk to but the sheep and God. And God was much better at conversation than sheep were. So I prayed and I prayed. Many times I would pray as many as 100 prayers a day. I would pray to God, let me escape like the bird from the fowler's nest. Let me go home. Let me go back to the world. It's estimated by historians today that he spent at least 10 years. He was snatched when he was 12, 13. And it wasn't until he was a man grown, in his mid-20s, that he finally was able to steal away from that hill, go all the way down south to County Cork, get aboard a ship, and after a long, torturous voyage, get home. But when he got home, the Ireland and the experience that he had went with him. You see, he had missed all his schooling. He had missed all the normal rites of passage that a young person in those days would have gone through. Imagine, 10 years is taken out of your life, and then you come back, and that great gap in your life is there, and you never do quite overcome it. If you read Patrick today, his Latin is atrocious. It's because he never went to school. He was much more comfortable writing in Gaelic than he was in Latin, the language of learning people, because of that big hole. He came back, and the parents that he had knew as young people were old. The world that he had known was different. He was, at best, a memory, a nightmare. And when he came home, while they were glad to see him, he would always be a man set apart and always marked out. This is an Irish penny whistle. Used to carry it around in my cargo pocket when I was in the field with the Marines. This was my Judy Ward and my Susan Kiefer in the bush. I couldn't schlep an organ or a piano. I'm a terrible singer, but I can play this. And when I play it, I think about not just Patrick, but I think about us. Because the way this works is just a tube of metal with holes in it. Patrick had big holes in his life. Those 10 years bored big ones into him. And I don't think he's the only one who has holes in his life. Think for a minute. Have you, from time to time, been snatched from what is safe and secure and set down in the middle of that which is dark and chaotic? was in the hospital this past week visiting people. We know the hospital, we know what happens there, but it doesn't make those feelings of fear go away. It doesn't make us not pray like this song, Lord, deliver me from this place. I have been with some of you as you have marked the passage of loved ones, and even though we saw it coming, we were snatched out of the world, and there's a great hole created by grief in our life. Some of you have felt that way when you've lost your job. Some of you feel that way now as you begin to lose your memory. All of us eventually feel that way when we lose our physical capabilities. Wabash as a whole, does it not feel that way when we miss the days when the factories were in full operation and now they are not? And we see the great holes that they create in our community. Don't we at Wabash Christian feel that now when we look about us at the pews and we think about the people who were here, but for whatever reason are not anymore? Don't you see? Patrick's story is our story. This happens to everyone. No one is completely whole. Everybody has marks in them. And as we will see, oddly enough, many times it is in those places where we have experienced tragedy or disappointment, it is from our scars that we can look to see God's presence do things we never imagined would take place. Reflect on it. On Patrick and how he began his life and what became of him and how he carried the marks of it the rest of his day. And think about your own life as well. It wasn't home anymore. And part of that is because he had that big hole in his life, those 10 years that he had missed. But part of that is because while he had been in Ireland, he had learned something that the Irish understood perhaps better than any schoolmaster back in Britain or Rome or Rouen or in Heidelberg. They may have been backwards, and they may not have had cities. They may not have known how to read or write. But the old pagan Celts had a wisdom that was born out of adversity. It is a wisdom that comes from wielding one of these all your days. My son brought this home from the UK when he went. It's a replica of a Celtic broadsword. The head is exactly the way it would have looked. They found one that looks just like it in the Bay of Dingle and was brought up in a fishing net. Tells you a lot about what life was like in those days. The Irish didn't depend on government. They had none. They didn't depend on schools or churches. They had none. In fact, they understood, just as Isaiah said, that we are in darkness. And that was not just illiteracy. They literally believed in a thing called Ganesha. Ganesha is the belief that we are all born with a fated destiny, that ours is a tragic life, and that when you're born into this world, along with your name, you are given by the capricious makers of this world a flaw. And the time will come when that flaw will be your undoing. They saw the world kind of like we would look at a minefield. Everywhere you go, there were traps, there were tricks that had been laid out before powers greater than yourself. And so if you live in a world like that, and you know that you will come to know the end, well, the only thing you can do is pick up one of these and cut your own best end as best you can. All the Irish heroes die young, but they die gloriously. Because they do not give in to the Ganesha. They stand up against it. That's not just an old thing, by the way. That still is very much an Irish virtue. When the men of 1916, the men who launched the modern Irish Republic, went to take over the General Post Office from the British, they went singing because they understood their Ganesha. They understood that they were going up the greatest empire of the world in those times, but they were going to go up with this in their hand. When John Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, by the way, Kennedy is a good Irish name. John Patrick Moynihan, who was also a good Irish name, said upon the occasion of Kennedy's death, "To know if you're Irish, what the world is like is to know that eventually it will break your heart. That's what Patrick grew up in. And that's what he carried with him back to Britain. And that's what he could never really turn loose of. It wasn't the sword, the life of the sword that he remembered. It was the way in which Isaiah spoke of people who sit in darkness. We all, to a certain degree, despite our best efforts, in the end are compelled to lose. Another good Irish name, Casey. Casey gets his time at the bat, but at the end, you only get 3 swings at the ball, and then it's all over. He understood that better than his family and friends back in Britain. And eventually, this began to invade his dreams. He dreamt of the Irish speaking to him. He spoke of it in the Latin as the Vox Hibernius, the voice of the Irish. He dreamed that they came to him and they said, "Come back to us. Come back to our darkness and join us in it and show us that there is indeed light." And it was that dream that motivated him to seek out the priesthood and to go to bishops of those time and to ask for something that no one had ever asked for before. "Send me into the darkness," he said. "Send me back to the Irish." Now keep this in mind. There had been other missionaries before him. There had been other apostles before him. We read about them in the New Testament. Paul travels all over the Mediterranean world, but it is the Roman world that he travels in. Patrick is truly the first cross-cultural missionary. He's the first one of us to go by choice into the darkness, into an alien world. Don't we all, at some point in our lives, hear the Vox Hibernius? Seriously, you can have a well-ordered life and you can plan as well as you can for success and for prosperity, but ultimately, don't you too receive a call to go into an unpleasant, dark, sometimes very brutish place? Isn't maybe this our Christian Ganesha? God comes and he says, I know you've got it all planned out, but I want you to do this very inconvenient thing. I want you to love this person who's in the darkness, join them in it. You think to yourself, I've got a very busy life, I've got it all squared away, and then someone comes to you and says, hey, I've got this Sunday school class and we need a teacher. Can you come join and help us out? You think to yourself, I've done my bit. I put my money in the plate, I went to the worship service, and now they want me to be on the board. Or someone comes to you, you're very well ordered and neat life, and they say to you, would you come help me with my addiction problem or my family problem? Patrick understood the true meaning of Ganesha. It's God. God calls us out of ourselves. We sit and we bask in the light, and God says, that's well and good, but come into the darkness, because it's not all about you. It's about what we can do together. Do you dream of that? Do we dream of that? It'd be very easy to sit here in this lovely place and bask in the light and to think to ourselves, we're the lucky ones, everything has fallen out well to us. But let me promise you, Wabash Christian, the minute you do that, the dreams will come. They will come and they will say, come out of this place, go into the darkness, be my representative, be my apostle. Let the people who have sat in darkness see a great light, and let you be the bearer of that light. Go to the meth houses. Go to those who have tried for a very long time to conceal their pain. We all know it's there, and go to them and set them at liberty to finally admit that they bear scars too. Go to those who don't have enough to eat. Go to those who are lonely. Go to those who feel forgotten. Go outside your own comfort. That is your Ganesha. That is your call. Do we have such dreams? If not, that's all right. In time we will. Because God loves us too much to let us grow fat and lazy and in love with ourselves. As we move into the third of the clover leaves, we're going to ask you to do something which is your Ganesha. We're going to ask you to do something that doesn't readily come easy to us. We're going to ask you to give. As we receive this morning's tithes and offerings, I'll put down the sword. But you must take up something much more deadly, an awareness that your life is not your own. You are God's person. And like a giving God, you are called to be a giving person. With this in mind, we'll receive this morning's tithes and offerings. Sacrifice was still being practiced. He was all alone. He expected himself to be the next sacrifice. But he understood something that was going on in those acts of sacrifice. He understood the way that the Irish feared the Ganesha. And so he simply did what we read about in Acts. He told them, you have nothing to be afraid of anymore. The creator of all creation is not one who puts tricks and traps in your way. You don't have to throw victims to him to make him go away. Indeed, he has made his own son the supreme victim. He has sacrificed himself so that you need be afraid no more. Contemporary students of missiology still are agog at the brilliance that Patrick displayed in showing that. He didn't give them a bunch of rules. He didn't give them an institution. He took from them what they themselves understood, and he helped them to understand. It was a bridge into understanding that you have always been God. So you have felt like you have been in the darkness, that you have been in the light. But that's just an illusion. That's just fear. You could put down your swords. You could stop your sacrifices. The supreme sacrifice has been made. And now, you are the light, and you are free to share that light with all that you might need. One man, in the course of 40 years, converted an entire people with that simple language. It really is unparalleled in the history of missiology. No one has come even close to swimming down to the mythological soul of a people as well as Patricius did. And it made all the difference. He helped them to understand that all that passion that they had channeled into keeping fear at bay, could now be channeled to God. And they could share with others the fact that you need be afraid no more. What he really taught them to do was to put down this and to pick up this. You ever seen one of these before? Tis a shillelagh. Tis. Do you know how to make a shillelagh? It's very simple. You can do it yourself. You find a stout piece of wood. This is a piece of blackthorn from County Wicklow. And then you do one of two things to it. You hang it in your fireplace flue over the winter. It sits there while the hot air rushes past it. It takes all the sap out of it. It cooks it all out. It makes it hard as an iron bar. The other thing you can do if you live out in the country is you take your piece of wood and you stick it handle deep in a manure pile. What happens is because of all the bacteria in the manure is warm and it over the winter will cook out all the sap and it makes it hard. Then what you have is a perfect walking stick. It accompanies you wherever you go. Patrick basically taught them that Christ was hung in the flue of hell so that all the grace that was in him could be leached out and could be ours. Christ dove head first into the manure pile of human frailty and sin, and that is what has made him so strong. And when we live in the same way, when we live for a great passion for something other than ourselves, it burns out of us, it cooks out of us. All that is not worthy, and it makes us true and stout. His followers believed this. They were mad for it. There's nothing the Irish love as a dramatic gesture. And so within a generation, they were throwing themselves into every manure pile, every chimney flue, every dark spot that they could find. Within a generation, Ireland would go from being a big sheep pen to becoming the home of the greatest universities in all of Europe. Within a generation, the Irish would leave Ireland and they would travel back to places like England and Scotland. They would go as far as Russia. Some believe today they got as far as Egypt. There would not be a European monarch for 400 years that did not have some Irish Christian scholar. They threw themselves into it. One, who you'll hear more about in May, Brendan the Navigator, threw himself so far into the North Atlantic that many people today believe he may have been the first European to come to America. They didn't hold back. They understood that God doesn't hold back. Those pictures of Jesus, it looks like the bright girl with the perfect blonde hair, the one who has his fingernails pared down just so. That is not Christ. Christ came leaping into this world, and that's what made him real. And when we leap into other people's lives, we become real. Can you think of any hot spots that you could leap into? Can you think of any manure piles that Wabash Christian Church could dive head first into? If you can, then those are the places where we become like Christ. Those are the places that we journey to so that we might become our true selves. One man did this. God used the holes in his life to make a whole people, and through them, a whole world whole. Could he do no less to you? Could he do no less to us? I would reflect on that. I would brood on that. While you do, you may also want to open up so that's Patrick's story. This imperfect man finds himself used by God in the most imperfect of places. Because the light can break out. I mean, it literally is the fulfillment of what we read about in the gospel. He goes into all the world. He goes outside the world and he preaches the gospel in a new language. Not in Latin, not in Greek, not in Hebrew, but in Gaelic. And everything changes. You can draw almost a straight line from what was set in motion by God through this man to where we are now. A big part of our disciple identity is the Scotch-Irish experience. It's not odd to me at all to find out that the same county that he is memorialized today, Black Armagh, is the place where Thomas and Alexander Campbell called home before they came here. Like him, they appreciated that which is at the very base of all things. You can believe anything you want about God, Patrick would say. Campbell will go along with that as well. But the important thing is, God believes in you. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And everything that we do and everything we believe is just a response to that. I point that out because this fourth clover leaf, the lucky one, is the place where you need to bear that most closely in mind. As we gather around the table this morning, I have no doubt whatsoever we all, because we are individuals and we have walked different paths, have all sorts of different opinions. I'm sure there are people here who will vote for every different candidate that will come up in the primary. I'm sure there are folks here from every social strata. There are IU fans and Purdue fans, and God help them, Notre Dame fans. They're here as well. The young and the old, the people who have just walked into Wabash Christian for the first time, or sitting side by side with people who cannot literally remember a time when they have been here. But, Patrick would say, but really needs to be focused on. It's not us. It's the way God has focused upon us. So please know this morning, as we gather around the table, Believe what you will. Be what you are. But ultimately, look at how God esteems you, how he has come looking for you in the darkness and shared his light with you, and that has made all the difference. Please, commune with us, because we commune with God.